Welcome back. We're going to tackle the second part of the evidence for evolution. So this is part two. And in this segment, we're going to look at something known as homologous structures, biogeography, and molecular evidence for evolution. Move my face again. All right. So here we're going to look at homologous structures. And what does that mean? If you remember from genetics, the prefix homo means the same. So find a place for me. Okay. So in this situation, we're talking about structures that have similar features. The structure is very similar, but the species that it's found in is going to be different. That tells us that we all inherited this same feature, homologous structure, from a common ancestor. So look at this example, all right? This is called a cladogram. It's kind of like a family tree. If this is the ancestor, okay, you can trace all of these different animals back. So a horse, a chicken, an alligator, a frog, trace them all back to this ancestor. So because they can all be traced back to this ancestor, we call that a common ancestor. That's one we all have in common. And it's color coded to show you these bones. So the fact that we have the orange segment the same in all of us and that it came from our common ancestor makes that bone a homologous structure. It's the same in all of us. Same with the purple and the green and the red and the blue. Okay, so these are known as homologous structures. The thing is that the structure is similar, but we don't use them for the same purpose. We don't use them for the same function. So for example, a horse is using these bones, okay? This is actually the leg of the horse. So it's using those bones to run. A chicken, being a bird, is using those bones to fly. The alligator, which is a reptile, is using those bones to walk, and the frog is using those bones to walk or swim as well because it usually has webbing in between of those. So, homologous structure, we all have these bones in common, but we're using them for different purposes because we're different species, we live in different environments, things like that. Right? The beaks of these birds can be another example. Move my face again. Um, this picture is showing the same thing actually before I go to the bird's beak. So here's us as a human. This time instead of looking at a leg, we're looking at an arm. So it's the same, but you have this bone up here known as your humerus. But so does a cheetah, so does a whale, so does a bat, right? You see the color coding. We all have these bones in common. You can clearly see where they are the same. They're not exactly the same though. I mean, the shape is a little bit different, but we've got a humerus, a single bone. We've got a pair of blue bones here, the radius and the ulna. We've got phalanges or our fingers, all extensions at the end there, okay? So these are, again, known as homologous structures. We all inherited them from a common ancestor, but we use them for different functions. The bat for flying, the whale for swimming, the cheetah for running. The human with our arms are using that to grasp, hold, carry things. But look at the beaks of birds. Bird beaks are very identifiable as a similar structure, right? They all have this beak, but they all use them for a different function. What are they eating is usually going to be the evidence that we need to see what kind of a beak that they're going to have. Do they eat fruit? Do they filter feed, like pick up water and filter out like krill and things like that, and shrimp and whatever? Are they a scavenger, like a vulture or something? Do they eat insects or nuts or whatever? So birds' beaks are homologous. They all inherited that beak from their ancestor bird species. The shape of the beak is slightly different because it's going to have a different function. So here's a question. What is true about these animals' limbs? So here we're looking at, again, a human, a cat, a whale, a bat, and they're color coded. They all have a similar bone structure. They all use their limbs for a similar function. They all have very different bone structures, or they inherited these bone structures from each other. So take a minute to think, what do I think the answer is to this question? A is the correct answer. They have a very similar bone structure. We can see the color coded to show us that they are the same. C is tricky because it says very different. It's not very different, it's very similar. All right, moving on to the next piece of evidence is biogeography. So remember, the word bio means life, okay? And geography is basically where on the map are we looking at living things. Um, so some species are going to have a similar adaptation, but they did not inherit it from a common ancestor. Why would they have a similar adaptation? It's because they live in a similar environment. There's that geography part. So, for example, a shark is a fish, a penguin is a bird, a dolphin is a mammal. These things are not closely related. Okay. But where do they all live? They have the same kind of environment, and that is in the water, in the ocean. And so we see that natural selection, that process of natural selection, when it changes a population, when it changes organisms over time, it's going to select for the best characteristic in that environment. Because they all lived in water, they ended up with the same kind of feature. Look at their body plan is very torpedo-like. It's aerodynamic. They can swim through the water very efficiently because they have this streamlined body. And, even though sharks and dolphins have this dorsal fin and a penguin doesn't, but look at these fins, right? A penguin is a bird, and these are technically wings, but it's a flightless bird. It cannot fly. It swims really well, though, and that's kind of acting like the fins or the flippers that these other aquatic organisms have. So, in this situation, we can look at organisms, living things that live in similar environments. There's that geography part, and notice that they have similar features because of natural selection, even though they're not closely related. So these are wings of these different species, these different organisms, and we can notice that they all have a similar feature. They can fly, right? They all have wings. But it says what's true about these animals' wings? Well, A says they all have a similar bone structure within their wings. B, they all use their limbs for a similar function. C, they inherited their wings from a common ancestor. Or D, they inherited these wings from each other. So here we have a seagull, which is a bird. Here is a dragonfly, which is an insect. And here is a bat, which is a mammal. So first, let's think, are they closely related? They're not closely related, okay? So they're not going to have inherited these features from a common ancestor. They didn't inherit wings from each other. They do not all have bones. The dragonfly only has wings that are like one cell thick. You can see through the wings of that dragonfly. A bird has feathers. A bat doesn't have feathers. It just has this skin stretched out, but you can see the bones in here. Okay. So B is the best answer. They all are using their limbs for a similar function. This is that biogeography thing, similar kind of environment, similar kind of behaviors, flight. So they have a similar feature, but they did not inherit it from a common ancestor. All right, for our last piece of evidence, molecular evidence. This one is probably the strongest piece of evidence that we have for evolution because it is quantifiable. We can actually count how much similarity or how much difference there is versus comparing physical features like fossils or bones or things like that. So when we talked about DNA and RNA and amino acids and proteins, these are all molecules or biological chemicals, okay? Chemicals of life. So, what we can do is we can compare these things with other species to see how close are our chemicals to their chemicals. So, if we review something real quick, remember that DNA determines the order of amino acids in a protein. Remember, DNA is the instructions on how to make a protein. If I want to build a protein like Legos, right, I need all of those individual pieces. The building blocks are called amino acids. And when I put them together in a specific order, all those amino acids together makes a protein. And again, in order to know how to make that protein, I need to use the DNA, which are like my instructions. So, if I give you an analogy that doesn't use biology, it's just kind of a simple thing. Let's look at this example. Imagine that we're going to make cookies. Okay. So, I have a recipe for cookies, and you have a recipe for cookies, but we're both going to make chocolate chip cookies. Okay. You gather your ingredients: flour, sugar, butter, salt, chocolate chips. I gather my ingredients: flour, sugar, butter, salt, chocolate chips. Same kinds of ingredients. But my cookie is a milk chocolate chip cookie, and your cookie is a white chocolate chip cookie. So we both made cookies. We both went through a similar process, but because of variation, your cookie is a little bit different from mine, and that's okay. You're a different person from me, but we both made chocolate chip cookies. We both followed a recipe that was very, very similar. Now, how is that like molecular evidence in evolution? Our recipe is like the DNA. Those are the instructions. Our ingredients are these amino acids, and the protein that we make is our cookie. Now, your protein might be slightly different from mine. That's why my hair color is different from yours, or my eye color is different from yours, or my skin color is different from yours. I have a different set of instructions making different proteins, but a lot of our proteins actually are the same. But in this example, we're looking at differences. How do we tell the difference between us? Now, that's how we can tell the difference between me and you. Your DNA is different from mine, but how do we apply that to like different species on this planet? So, look at this example. We know that over time, okay, we have an ancestor species and that it can give rise to different species. So, for example, like over here, we've got zebras, and I don't even know what some of these things are. We've got donkeys, we've got horses. This is again like a family tree that shows how they're all connected to each other. Okay. So Equus would be like their common ancestor. So jump over here, the ancestor to species A and species B. So think of it like a horse and a zebra. Well, if we trace back in time, okay, we go back to the common ancestor, think of these as timelines. It says, how many total differences do you see when you compare species A to species B? Well, if we know that over time, random mutations happen and natural selection selects for differences, let's count up the number of mutations that happened. For species B, over time, 1, 2, 3 mutations. For species A, over time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mutations. So collectively, there's 8 differences between the two of them, okay? That says at point 1, so if we looked at this point in time, are the two species pretty similar or very different? Well, they started off as a one species, right? The common ancestor, but then they split. There's a split, there's a difference in the species. At this point in time, there's only one, two differences between this. So would the two species be pretty similar or very different early on? They'd be really similar. Okay. In the beginning, they're going to be very similar. So if we think about this sentence, as time goes on, right? The greater the time that organisms have been diverging, that word diverge means to split, to separate. The greater the time that they've been diverging from their common ancestor, would you think that there'd be more differences or fewer differences when you compare their DNA? The more time that they diverge, more differences or less differences? More differences. The greater the number of differences that you would be able to see between the two of them, right? And that's why, when you first have a species that splits, when you look at it, they're not, let's see if I can zoom in here myself. Okay. When you look at these, the mountain zebra, Chapman zebra, whatever this guy is, a quagga, Grevy zebra, you know, their little branch is not that big, so they're pretty similar to each other, the zebras, right? But then if I go down to the horses, for example, there's the domestic horse and Przalski's horse or whatever that is. Their branch is close, so they're not that different. But if I zoom back out, look at how big the branch is between the mountain zebra and the domestic horse. Okay, very, very different over time. More time, the more differences. All right, to wrap this up here. So again, how can we use these pieces of evidence? How can we use these molecular comparisons as evidence for evolution? Okay. It says compare the DNA or proteins of two species. In this case, we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 species. And right here, we're looking at their amino acids. Okay, so it's still molecules, okay, still pieces of molecule evidence. From the previous slide, if we predict the greater the number of differences between two species, the more different they are they more or less closely related? The more differences that there are, the less closely related they are. The fewer the differences, the more similar they are, the more closely related. So in this, it says using the information in this box, which two species would be the most closely related? So you have a human, a horse, a gorilla, a chimpanzee, and a zebra. If we're looking at the sequence of their amino acids, so there's 4 amino acids that we're looking at here. Take a minute to look at this information to identify which two species would be the most closely related. Okay, hopefully you picked the human and the chimpanzee. Now it says justify your answer. So tell me why. Well, the human's amino acids are lysine, glutamine, histidine, isoleucine, and the chimpanzees match that pattern exactly, right? But then you notice that, like, for example, the horse and the zebra are almost exactly the same, arginine, lysine, histidine, but that fourth amino acid is different. So the horse and the zebra have more differences compared to them. You can look at the gorilla compared to the human and the chimp. the first three are the same, but its fourth one is different. So we can start to create these relationships to show how closely related species are to each other. Okay. All right, that's it for this segment. That means that we're done with the evidence for evolution. So review part one and part two of these videos. Do the Cahoots, the reviews, and get ready for your quiz. All right, keep going. As always, let me know if you have questions or you need help with anything. Have a good day.